a lot of stereotypes about millennials these days. And the most common one to me would be that millennials are lazy. To me, millennials aren't lazy. They work differently, and there was even a study in the Times magazine that proved that millennials are actually workaholics, so they'll work until they're dead. And there was another study in Latin America that proves this whole stereotype wrong. The data indicated that 41% of them study, 21% work, and 17% do both activities. And the other 21% does not work or study. This means that nearly 8 out of the 10 study, work, or do both. It is the last 21% that is responsible for the bad name of an entire generation. The so-called ninnies, those who do not study or work, however, even they are unfairly characterized, since most of them carry out productive activities. 31% looking for work, 64% are caregivers of the family members, and 95% perform domestic chores or provide assistance to their family's business. Only 3% of those ninnies, approximately 0.6% of all Latin America and Caribbean millennials, do not do anything useful, despite having the physical and intellectual faculties of it. So that proves that millennials aren't lazy. Stereotype about millennials is that they're self-absorbed. Technically, everyone is self-absorbed to some sort of degree. Yes, millennials brought about the selfie. Undoubtedly, this lends to the belief that the generation of millennials is self-centered. It's even more difficult to dispute the claim when all social media is filled with attention-seeking images begging for likes and comments. Luckily, the data suggests that millennials are a little more community-focused than one would think. In the document released by the Council of Economic Advisors, it was found that high school seniors are more likely to state that making a contribution to society was important to them compared to a previous generation. Furthermore, they expressed desire to be leaders in their community. It doesn't stop there either. Approximately half of those in the study reported that it was important to them to live close to family and friends. Contrastingly, only 29% of baby boomers and 40% of Gen Xers felt the same. Self-absorbed doesn't mean like an accurate description, just speaking only for myself. I fully disagree with the label. I have friends who volunteer to work with after-school children, friends who support their parents financially, and friends who work with the sexual assault victims. I see millennials who achieved massive financial success trying to share tips on YouTube because they want to help. I listen to podcasts of millennials working to educate others. There are absolutely selfish millennials, just as there are selfish people in every generation. For me, I more often hear about the millennial trying to retire his parents than the millennial trying to game the system. That is why the stereotype of millennials being self-absorbed is completely inaccurate. There is even a stereotype about millennials being overly sensitive. Millennials are known for being sensitive, but society is applying the label to the wrong generation. Turns out older generations are more hypersensitive than younger generations. A new study published in the journal Psychology and Aging found this suggests that millennials, those ages 23 to 38, are less sensitive than baby boomers, those ages 55 to 73. Business Insider's Julia Nathatulian reported the researchers defined hypersensitivity as being unreceptive to others' feedback and lashing out at any criticism towards oneself. And Tulian wrote, the study, the largest on the narcissism to date, examined 6 previously collected data sets that included nearly 750 people ages 13 to 77. To better understand how narcissistic traits vary among generations and how levels of narcissism change as people age, it examined both generational and individual trends in narcissistic behaviors, unlike previous studies on narcissism that focused on only one or the other, according to Nathatulian. Narcissistic personality disorder, according to the Mayo Clinic, is a mental state that involves an inflated sense of self-importance, a need for excessive attention and admiration, a lack of empathy, and low self-esteem vulnerable to criticism. These traits exist on a spectrum and can exist even if the person does not have the disorder. Researchers found that as people in the study age, they become less sensitive with hypersensitivity, sharply declining at age 40. But when they looked at generation-specific trends, they found that younger generations were less sensitive than their parents. Millennials have a reputation as snowflakes. The findings are the opposite of how many people view millennials. In 2017, an interview with Forbes, Neil Howe, a generational expert, said that news organizations often referred to millennials as Generation Snowflake, a disparaging term for being sheltered, politically correct, and sensitive. While the stereotype has kernels of the truth, Howe said in the criticism paints a distorted picture. To focus just on these traits in a negative way typically leads to associated claims about millennials that have no basis in fact. He said, and it tempts us to overlook genuine millennial strengths that will likely hugely benefit our country in years to come. For example, millennials are generally earnest, positive, accepting of others, and optimistic, qualities that have a greater influence in the long run. The Time magazine reporter Joel Stein wrote in a 2013 cover story exploring the stereotype of millennials as lazy and entitled. Baby boomers, he said, are known as the me generation, but they produce millennials, the me generation. He found that there was a much bigger picture beyond the stereotype. A generation's greatness, he wrote, is determined by how they react to the challenge that befall them, and just as important, by how we react to them. In conclusion, the stereotypes about millennials are false and need to stop. The newer generation will always critique the rising generation. They will ceaselessly call them lazy and critique their work ethic. They'll probably even make fun of their fashion and music. It's just how the world works. It's just a big misunderstanding, a failure to wear a different perspective. Millennials, baby boomers, and Gen Xers are probably more alike than they realize.